The city lights of Manhattan shimmered through the rain-soaked windows of Benjamin Hard's loft, reflecting the restless rhythm of a city that never truly slept. A cup of green tea steamed on his desk as he scrolled through the news alerts on his tablet. One headline immediately captured his attention: "Priceless Munch masterpiece stolen from New York elite auction house." Benjamin leaned back, his piercing gray-blue eyes narrowing. The Scream. One of the world's most iconic paintings, snatched from an auction that prided itself on its impeccable security. Alarm systems, motion detectors, cameras, none had been triggered. The footage available showed only a shadow, passing through the hall as if reality itself bent around it. He had no assignment, no client asking him to investigate. Yet, something about the story pricked at the edges of his mind. It was not merely the audacity of the theft, but the precision. Whoever had done this, had done it flawlessly, leaving behind no trace that a casual observer, or even a professional, could follow. That, more than anything, demanded attention. Benjamin knew he had to see it for himself. He dressed in his usual attire, a crisp white shirt under a dark tailored suit, his coat draped neatly over his shoulders. The leather shoes clicked against the wooden floor as he left his loft, blending into the drizzle of the night. By the time he arrived at the New York elite auction house, the building stood like a fortress of glass and stone, imposing and precise, as though daring anyone to challenge it. Inside, the atmosphere was calm yet taut, the kind of tense quiet that followed a storm. The room where the Scream had been displayed was empty now, the velvet ropes standing as solemn sentinels. Benjamin walked slowly, absorbing every detail: the subtle scuff marks on the marble floor, the slight misalignment of decorative panels, the faint scent of linseed oil lingering in the air, perhaps from other pieces. Each fragment, no matter how small, told a story. Victor Kane, the auction house's owner, met him at the entrance. A tall man with a presence that seemed to command the room without speaking, Kane's dark eyes assessed Benjamin with an inscrutable gaze. "I assume you're here about the news," he said smoothly, his voice confident, yet betraying a flicker of something else: concern, perhaps, or caution. Benjamin nodded. "I've read the reports. I'm interested in the details, how it happened, what evidence there might be. Even a flawless theft leaves a trace." His tone was calm, measured, but every word carried weight, demanding attention. Kane raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his gaze, yet he gestured toward the room where the painting had hung. As Benjamin moved through the auction hall, he noted the peculiarities. The surveillance cameras, normally angled to catch every corner, had subtle blind spots, enough for someone skilled to exploit. The hall's ventilation system, massive and ancient, hummed quietly, offering a possible route for movement unseen. And then there were the witnesses, staff members and a few select guests who had attended the private viewing. Their accounts varied, their descriptions of the shadow inconsistent, fleeting, almost surreal. Benjamin catalogued each observation, mentally assembling a map of the crime scene. He could already see the outlines of the perpetrator's plan, the careful orchestration that allowed a painting as famous as the Scream to vanish without a trace. And yet, there was something more, something that went beyond the mechanics of theft, a message, a signature, hidden in the meticulous execution. As he left the hall, Benjamin's mind was already racing. Every detail, every subtle anomaly, was a thread he would follow. The rain outside had eased to a fine mist, the city's heartbeat echoing around him. He did not yet know who had taken the painting, or why, but he felt the familiar stir of anticipation, a puzzle, a challenge, a game that was waiting for him to play, and one he intended to win. Back in his coat, walking under the flickering lights of Manhattan, Benjamin knew one thing with certainty: the Scream would not remain hidden for long. Every shadow leaves a trace, and he had already begun to see them all. The lobby of the New York elite auction house gleamed under the soft, golden light of the chandeliers, the polished marble floors reflecting every subtle movement. Benjamin Hard entered, moving deliberately, his eyes sweeping the room like a predator scanning a field. Each detail mattered: the faint scuff marks along the edges of the marble, the imperceptibly tilted paintings on the walls, the fingerprints smudged on brass door handles, and the tension in the posture of the staff. Nothing escaped him, not the subtle twitch of an eye nor the slight hesitation in a step. Every trace, no matter how small, could tell a story. At the top of the grand staircase, Victor Kane waited. The man's presence was magnetic, almost intimidating, radiating authority without the need for words. Kane's tailored suit was perfect, his posture impeccable, but his eyes, there was something in them. A shadow, a guardedness, as if he measured every step before taking it, calculated every glance before allowing it to escape. Benjamin noted it immediately. People like Kane were careful, every word, every gesture, every blink was a deliberate act designed to maintain control. Yet, control, no matter how practiced, left its traces. "Mr. Hard," Kane said, his voice smooth and confident, extending a hand. "I hear you have taken an interest in the recent incident." Benjamin shook his hand firmly, letting a long moment linger. "I'm not here officially," he said, measured and calm, "but a theft of this magnitude, it's too perfect to ignore. Even the most flawless crimes leave traces. I like to see patterns where others see chaos." Kane's lips curved into a polite, practiced smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "Patterns, yes. I admire clarity. But sometimes patterns can mislead, Mr. Hard. Especially when they are forced." His gaze locked on Benjamin's, sharp, evaluating, as if testing the limits of his composure. Benjamin observed the micro-expressions, the subtle flex of Kane's fingers as he rested on the banister, the brief glance toward the surveillance monitors behind him, the slight tension in his jaw. Kane had built a carefully controlled environment, but humans, even the most disciplined, left invisible breadcrumbs. Benjamin catalogued them all. "How does a painting like the Scream disappear without triggering alarms?" Benjamin asked quietly, almost conversationally, yet every syllable carried weight. "No one saw the thief. The footage shows only a shadow, passing through the hall as though it weren't there." Kane's eyes flickered, just for a moment. He gestured toward the main hall, leading Benjamin down the staircase. "We have reviewed the footage thoroughly," Kane said, his tone smooth, controlled, yet there was the slightest edge of tension in his voice. "But as I told the authorities, some things are never simple. This was meticulous. Someone had knowledge of our systems, our routines. It wasn't a random act." Benjamin's mind raced. Inside this palace of wealth and art, every employee, every guest, every guard could play a role. But Kane's careful orchestration, the way he subtly guided Benjamin through the space, suggested he either knew more than he revealed, or was hiding something critical. As they passed the now empty hall where the Scream had hung, Benjamin's attention zeroed in on the details others overlooked. A few remaining artworks were slightly misaligned, a pedestal bore a faint smear, and a single loose wire hinted at tampered security. Kane's eyes followed him, measuring, weighing, calculating. "We value discretion here," Kane said, voice polite, almost casual. "Every piece has its story, Mr. Hard, but some stories are dangerous when spoken aloud." Benjamin catalogued every gesture, every nuance of interaction, every subtle signal between Kane and his staff. The theft was no accident, it was a challenge, a game designed for those who could perceive the hidden rules. He could already trace the invisible lines connecting Kane, the staff, and the invisible hands that had removed the painting. As Benjamin exited the auction house, the evening shadows stretched long over the Manhattan streets. His mind replayed each glance, each subtle micro-expression, each anomaly he had observed. Kane thrived on control, and control always left patterns. Benjamin understood something important: the theft of the Scream was only the beginning. Beneath the missing painting lay a web of secrets, ambition, and deception, and it was Benjamin's task to unravel it all. Walking back to his loft through the misty streets, Benjamin felt the familiar stir of anticipation. The city breathed around him, alive with whispers of wealth, danger, and hidden intentions. He sipped his green tea, eyes focused, mind already tracing invisible paths. The shadows of the auction house, the tension in Kane's gaze, and the faint traces of a flawless crime were threads waiting to be followed, and Benjamin Hard had already begun to see the pattern. Back in his loft, Benjamin Hard poured himself another cup of green tea, letting the warm aroma settle his thoughts. The city lights of Manhattan flickered against the windows, a restless, chaotic rhythm mirrored in the scattered reports, photos, and digital files he had compiled. Every detail of the theft of the scream demanded scrutiny, and Benjamin began the methodical process of untangling the strands of what initially seemed an impossible puzzle. He started with the surveillance footage. The shadow that moved through the auction hall was fleeting, almost spectral. Yet Benjamin's trained eyes detected anomalies that others had missed, slight distortions in the background, a faint reflection in a polished surface, a brief interruption in the lighting. Each anomaly hinted at a path, a route the thief had taken, invisible to ordinary observation. He mapped it meticulously, drawing lines across the blueprint of the hall, correlating the shadow's movements with ventilation shafts, stairwells, and blind spots in the cameras. Next, he examined the physical evidence left behind. The scuff marks on the marble floors, the faint smudge on a pedestal, and the subtle misalignment of remaining artworks were not accidents, they were breadcrumbs, whether intentional or careless. Benjamin measured each mark, photographed angles, and compared them to the footprints and impressions recorded in the security logs. The pattern was precise, deliberate, a choreography that required intimate knowledge of the building and its systems. He turned his attention to the staff statements. Some were inconsistent, others too consistent, an odd calm that suggested rehearsal. Benjamin cross-referenced their accounts with timelines and camera angles, isolating the moments where discrepancies appeared. He noted micro-expressions recorded in the security interviews, a twitch of the lip, a quick glance away, the dilation of pupils at key questions. Each was a psychological clue, revealing more about potential involvement than any direct testimony could. Benjamin also delved into the history of the scream itself. The painting had been the subject of numerous high-profile exhibitions and previous theft attempts. He compiled records, noting past security flaws and patterns of interest among collectors. Certain names recurred, a few private collectors known for their obsession with rare pieces, some with histories of attempting impossible heists. While none had been linked to the current theft, Benjamin noted the profiles, psychological tendencies, and possible motivations, building a mental dossier of potential suspects. Beyond the tangible evidence, Benjamin analyzed the environment. The auction house itself was a character in the drama, ventilation shafts that could hide a small person, emergency exits rarely checked, and camera blind spots that aligned with subtle architectural quirks. Even lighting and reflective surfaces were part of the puzzle, a shadow could appear to pass through walls if the angles were precise. The more Benjamin examined, the more he realized this was not just a theft but a meticulously planned operation, executed by someone with extraordinary foresight and cunning. Late into the night, Benjamin set up simulations. Using miniature models and diagrams, he recreated the sequence of events, testing every hypothesis. Each movement, each timing of a step, each deviation from the expected path was considered. Slowly, the picture began to form, a trail, invisible to most, yet unmistakable to him. The thief had not been careless, but even precision left fragments, subtle markers that only a mind trained to notice would detect. By the early hours, Benjamin reviewed his conclusions. The evidence suggested one thing clearly: the thief had intimate knowledge of the auction house, likely insider access, and an extraordinary ability to manipulate perception. Yet even with such planning, Benjamin sensed a flaw in their design, an assumption that had not accounted for a single mind observing, calculating, and connecting the dots. He leaned back, exhausted but focused, knowing the investigation was only beginning. The city outside had quieted, but the rhythm in Benjamin's mind was relentless. Every detail of the theft of the scream, every shadow, every smudge, every anxious glance would guide him forward. The puzzle was intricate, the challenge immense, but for Benjamin Hard, unraveling the impossible was not just a task, it was an inevitable outcome. And somewhere, within the tangled web of evidence and human deception, lay the path that would lead him to the missing masterpiece. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Benjamin Hard's loft, casting long shadows over the scattered notes and photographs that chronicled the theft of the scream. Benjamin sipped his green tea, eyes scanning the details once more, before deciding the next step, speaking to the witnesses. He returned to the New York elite auction house, where the aftermath of the theft lingered like a tense fog. Staff moved quietly, their movements careful and deliberate, while the air itself seemed charged with anxiety. Benjamin observed each individual, cataloging posture, gaze, and subtle gestures. He didn't need them to speak, their bodies and expressions often revealed more than words. The first witness was a security guard, young and nervous, who had been stationed near the main hall the night of the theft. His story was fragmented, hesitant, full of pauses. Benjamin noticed the way his hands fidgeted and the way his eyes darted toward the cameras as if seeking reassurance. I saw something, maybe," the guard stammered. Benjamin allowed him to speak, but inwardly, he noted inconsistencies, cross-referencing them with the recorded footage. The guard's fear suggested either innocence or careful concealment. Next came a valet, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a quiet demeanor. He had been responsible for parking cars during the private auction. His account was precise, almost too precise, every movement timed to the second. Benjamin listened closely, noting the subtle micro-expressions, tightened lips, slight flinches, clues that hinted at stress beneath his controlled exterior. The valet's statements aligned with some of the footage, but the human subtlety suggested layers Benjamin needed to explore further. Then there were the guests, affluent collectors who had attended the private viewing. Each presented a different narrative. One described a fleeting shadow in the corner of the hall, another claimed to hear a distant noise that seemed out of place. Benjamin compared their accounts to the physical evidence and video records, identifying contradictions, overlaps, and subtle hints of deceit. The patterns began to form, revealing not only what had happened but what each individual wanted him to see, or hide. Benjamin also took note of interpersonal dynamics. Who glanced at whom? Who hesitated before answering? A man's glance could betray allegiance, a twitch of the eyebrow could hint at prior knowledge. Every micro-expression, every slight hesitation or overcompensation, became part of his mental map. By the time he finished interviewing the witnesses, Benjamin had built detailed psychological profiles, each person a potential piece of the puzzle. He returned to his loft later, reviewing his notes. The guard's nervousness, the valet's calculated precision, the subtle discrepancies in the guests' accounts, each was a thread. Some threads were red herrings, intended to mislead, but Benjamin could distinguish the intentional from the accidental. He began connecting patterns, identifying the most likely suspects and narrowing down who had both motive and opportunity. It was during this process that he realized the theft was more than a simple act of greed. Someone had exploited knowledge of human behavior, the predictable patterns of staff and guests, and the weaknesses in even the most sophisticated security systems. Benjamin's mind raced, analyzing scenarios, predicting reactions, and considering the unseen consequences of each possible suspect's choices. The city outside his loft hummed with life, oblivious to the intricate mental chess unfolding above its streets. Benjamin leaned back, hands steepled, eyes focused on the web of relationships, timelines, and behavioral cues. The suspects were not just names or faces, they were variables in a larger equation. And Benjamin Hard, with patience, observation, and relentless logic, would solve it. By the end of the day, the outlines of the culprit began to emerge. Patterns intersected, inconsistencies aligned, and hidden truths slowly revealed themselves. The witnesses and suspects had unwittingly provided him a map, one that would lead him ever closer to the scream and the mind that had taken it. The streets of Manhattan had changed under the evening sky. Rain had left the pavement glistening, reflecting the neon lights of restaurants, bars, and late-night shops. Benjamin Hard walked with purpose, his coat collar turned up against the damp chill, green tea long gone but his mind still simmering with clues from the witnesses and suspects he had analyzed earlier. Tonight, the trail led somewhere unusual, an underground art club known only to those with connections in the city's private art circles. The club was hidden behind an unmarked door in a narrow alley, its presence betrayed only by a faint hum of conversation and the soft glow of light seeping through a crack. Benjamin entered, blending effortlessly with the eclectic crowd. Artists, collectors, and shadowy figures moved among sculptures and abstract paintings, their faces masks of intrigue and curiosity. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and subtle danger, a place where the value of art often outweighed the law. Benjamin observed quietly. Conversations flowed around him, snippets of deals, whispers of rare pieces, and murmurs about impossible thefts. A stolen Munch, discussed in low voices, caught his attention immediately. He followed the thread, moving through the dimly lit room, noticing patterns in behavior, who avoided eye contact, who lingered near certain artworks, who spoke too loudly to mask unease. It was there he spotted a figure of interest, tall, lean, always staying on the periphery of groups, eyes darting to watch both the crowd and exits. Benjamin noted the subtle gestures, a gloved hand brushing along the edge of a painting frame, a slight pause when someone mentioned high-profile auctions, the faint glint of a ring reflecting the dim lights. The figure was alert, cautious, but not entirely comfortable in this environment. That discomfort, Benjamin knew, often indicated proximity to secrets too dangerous to reveal. He approached indirectly, engaging others along the way, listening, observing. The club was a labyrinth of whispered truths and deliberate distractions. Someone here had been involved with the scream, or at the very least had information. Benjamin's mind traced connections between the underground chatter and the earlier evidence from the auction house, movements, timing, access points, and behavioral patterns. Slowly, a network emerged, a hidden map linking the shadows to real people, each with motives and skills. As he moved deeper into the club, Benjamin realized the risks. Cameras were few but present, security was subtle, a pair of discreet attendants monitoring interactions. The figure he had been tracking noticed him then, and their eyes locked briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement of awareness. Benjamin noted the micro-expression, a flash of recognition, quickly replaced by calm. Whoever this was, they were intelligent and careful, someone who understood games and the value of secrecy. Benjamin retreated momentarily, blending with a group observing a small sculpture in the corner. He took mental notes, positions of exits, lighting angles, potential escape routes, and who might be guarding them. Every observation, every detail, fed into his growing reconstruction of the theft. He understood that whoever orchestrated the disappearance of the scream had not acted randomly, the underground club was either a hub of information or a testing ground for future moves. By the time he left the club, the night had deepened into a quiet, almost oppressive darkness. The figure remained in his mind, an anchor point in the sprawling web of leads and suspects. Benjamin Hard walked through the empty streets, each step deliberate, every observation stored meticulously in his memory. The underground art club had offered more than clues, it had given him insight into the psychology of the perpetrator, the ecosystem in which the scream had vanished, and the subtle connections that might lead him to its recovery. Back at his loft, Benjamin spread out the notes, sketches, and mental maps he had accumulated. The pieces were slowly fitting together, and he could feel the invisible threads tightening toward the culprit. The underground world of art was dangerous, but for Benjamin Hard, danger was merely another variable in the complex, exhilarating puzzle that was the theft of the scream. The early morning fog settled over Manhattan like a veil, softening the harsh edges of the city. Benjamin Hard walked along the streets, his mind replaying the events of the underground art club. Every detail mattered, the cautious movements, the micro-expressions, the subtle hints of information. Now it was time to consider the architecture itself, the hidden routes, the possible escape paths, and the traps laid by both human and structural design. Back at the New York elite auction house, Benjamin had obtained a floor plan from a discreet source. He spread it across his loft desk, marking potential points of entry and exit, blind spots in the camera coverage, and ventilation shafts that could allow discreet movement. Each line, each angle, each corridor became part of a mental model. To an ordinary observer, it was simply a blueprint, but to Benjamin, it was a map of possibilities. He began with the main hall where the scream had been displayed. The surveillance footage suggested a single shadow had passed through, yet there were inconsistencies, a missing reflection here, a shifted object there. Benjamin traced potential routes along walls and corridors, visualizing the thief's path. One section of the ventilation system, an old shaft used for climate control, aligned perfectly with a blind spot in the cameras, a route invisible to all but a trained eye. Benjamin also considered human factors. Guards had predictable patrol patterns, staff movements were timed precisely, and lighting shifts created moments of concealment. He simulated the theft in his mind, noting where a person could move undetected and where timing would be critical. The more he reconstructed, the clearer it became, the thief had not been reckless, they had anticipated every possible obstacle. Outside the auction house, Benjamin walked the streets surrounding the building. Delivery entrances, emergency stairwells, and service alleys, all were potential avenues of escape. He noted the subtle cues, scuff marks in the alley, a slightly loose grate near a basement door, a discarded coffee cup with an unusual label. These small details, easily ignored by others, were vital to understanding the execution of the theft. He returned to the loft to test his hypotheses. Using miniature models of the building and surrounding streets, he recreated the sequence of movements, considering every possibility. He adjusted the angles of lights, the timing of security rotations, and the paths taken through corridors. Each adjustment brought the model closer to a realistic scenario of how the screen could have been removed without triggering alarms or leaving obvious traces. Benjamin also identified potential traps. Security measures that appeared passive, pressure-sensitive floors, motion sensors with delayed triggers, even the arrangement of nearby artworks, could have been manipulated to mislead investigators. Understanding these traps required a combination of spatial reasoning, timing, and psychological insight. The thief had designed the theft as both a physical and intellectual challenge. As dusk approached, Benjamin finalized his analysis. He now had a network of routes, probable positions, and escape strategies, each supported by evidence from footage, staff accounts, and the building's architecture. It was a map of both possibility and intention, showing not only where the thief had moved but also hinting at their mindset, calculated, precise, confident. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, hands steepled, green tea forgotten. The picture was becoming clear, the invisible threads connecting architecture, human behavior, and timing forming a coherent pattern. He could almost visualize the thief slipping through shadows, bypassing cameras, and navigating the labyrinth of corridors with calm, deliberate precision. One thing was certain, the thief had underestimated one variable. Benjamin Hard was observing, calculating, and connecting the dots. Every hidden route, every carefully laid trap, every detail of timing and motion was now part of his understanding. And the pursuit of the scream, a masterpiece shrouded in shadows, deception, and human cunning, was entering its most critical phase. The night air was sharp, carrying the faint hum of Manhattan traffic below. Benjamin Hard's coat flapped around him as he moved swiftly through the alleyways behind the New York elite auction house. His mind was focused, reconstructing the thief's route from the evidence he had meticulously analyzed. He had a target, a shadowy figure glimpsed at the underground art club, and tonight, he intended to follow. The streets were slick from earlier rain, reflecting neon lights that painted the sidewalks in streaks of color. Benjamin navigated with precision, noting potential escape routes, fire escapes, and service entrances. Then he saw movement ahead, a tall figure slipping through a narrow side street, cautious yet urgent. Benjamin's pulse quickened, but his stride remained steady. This was not a reckless pursuit, every step, every breath, was calculated. He gained on the figure, moving through the maze of Manhattan rooftops with practiced agility. The chase was tense but controlled, Benjamin's knowledge of human behavior giving him an edge. The thief glanced back, realizing they were being followed, but Benjamin remained calm, invisible in the shadows. He observed how the figure adjusted their pace, which indicated nervousness rather than confidence, an important insight into the thief's mindset. The rooftops were slick, uneven, and perilous, yet Benjamin's experience allowed him to move efficiently. He noted each ledge, each vent, each narrow passage. The thief leapt over a gap between buildings. Benjamin followed, landing with a precise, controlled roll. The rhythm of the city below seemed distant, almost irrelevant, as the chase continued above the streets. At one point, the figure paused, looking over the edge of a rooftop toward a fire escape. Benjamin approached silently, analyzing the possibilities. The thief had miscalculated the timing of guards in the area and the angle of streetlights below. Benjamin adjusted his own movements, ensuring he remained unseen while closing the distance. Suddenly, the thief made a sharp turn, entering a small enclosed rooftop area. Benjamin had anticipated this maneuver, positioning himself to intercept. The figure's eyes widened as they recognized they were being cornered, not with brute force, but with the inevitability of observation. Benjamin spoke calmly, his voice cutting through the night. "It's over. There's no need to run." The thief hesitated, calculating options. Benjamin noted their micro-expressions, fleeting panic, attempts at feigned confidence, and the slightest twitch of a hand toward an unseen object, perhaps a weapon, perhaps a tool. Every detail reinforced Benjamin's mental profile, careful, intelligent, but desperate. After a tense moment, the figure gave up, realizing escape was impossible. Benjamin secured them with minimal effort, his calm authority leaving no room for resistance. He studied the person closely. Their clothing, movements, and mannerisms matched several clues from the auction house and underground art club. This was a significant lead, someone deeply involved in the theft of the scream, or at least part of the network that had facilitated it. The city stretched below them, light sparkling like distant stars. Benjamin took a measured breath, mentally retracing the thief's path, the choices they had made, and the errors they had introduced. Every step of the chase had revealed psychological and strategic information. The rooftop pursuit was not just a physical test, it was an insight into the mind of someone who believed themselves untouchable. By the time the police arrived, summoned quietly by Benjamin, the situation was under control. The thief was contained, but Benjamin's focus remained on the bigger picture, the networks, the motives, and the final location of the scream. Each detail of the chase, each calculated move, had provided critical intelligence. And Benjamin Hard knew that the real challenge, the confrontation with the mastermind and the recovery of the stolen masterpiece, was still ahead. Returning to his vantage point on the roof, Benjamin allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The shadows of Manhattan stretched endlessly around him, but he could already see the threads of the next phase, guiding him toward the truth and the ultimate retrieval of the priceless painting. The city had quieted, but Benjamin Hard's mind was electric with anticipation. The rooftop chase had yielded a key lead. The thief had connections to a hidden network, a place where stolen art and confidential knowledge converged. Benjamin had traced these threads to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Manhattan, a structure that appeared innocuous by day but concealed its secrets behind layers of misdirection. Approaching the warehouse, Benjamin noted the subtle indicators he had learned to recognize: scuffed doorways, fresh tire marks on the nearby gravel, and a faint, almost imperceptible scent of linseed oil, likely from recently handled artwork. Every detail suggested this was no ordinary hideout. It was a curated workshop, designed by someone with knowledge of art, security, and human behavior. The warehouse door creaked open under Benjamin's careful push. Inside, shadows danced against high ceilings, illuminated by a few strategically placed lamps. The air smelled faintly of paint, varnish, and dust. Rows of canvases leaned against the walls, some covered with cloth, others partially visible. Benjamin's eyes immediately locked onto a familiar silhouette, a frame unmistakable, the distinctive shape of the scream. His pulse quickened, but his movements remained controlled, precise, deliberate. The workshop was a labyrinth of tables, easels, and storage crates. Tools for handling art, protective gloves, and measuring instruments lay neatly arranged. Every object suggested meticulous planning. Benjamin noted the security traps that had been set here: motion sensors, false paths, and misleading placements designed to confuse intruders. The thief was intelligent, perhaps overconfident, yet even the most sophisticated systems could not outmatch Benjamin's observation and reasoning. He moved cautiously through the space, cataloging evidence. Paintings from other high-profile thefts were present, but the screen dominated the room, positioned carefully on a raised easel, lit by a focused lamp that made the iconic image glow against the dim surroundings. The thief had treated it as both trophy and centerpiece, a work of obsession carefully preserved. Benjamin's analytical mind catalogued every detail, angles, light sources, placement of the frame, and possible escape routes. Then he noticed something unexpected. A small notebook lay on a nearby table, partially hidden under a stack of sketches. Its pages contained diagrams, codes, and notes, annotations about the auction house, the underground art club, and routes through the city. Each line revealed careful planning and strategic thinking. Benjamin recognized patterns in the writing, obsessive attention to detail, an understanding of human behavior, and an undercurrent of personal ambition. This notebook was a key to understanding not just the theft, but the thief's psyche. Benjamin's eyes scanned the workshop further. There were subtle reminders of previous thefts, small trinkets, objects collected as trophies, each signaling a habit, a ritual. He realized the thief was not only skilled in execution but also in symbolism, each act carried meaning beyond monetary gain. The theft of the scream was more than a crime, it was a statement, a challenge to those who dared to follow. He allowed himself a measured breath, absorbing the scene. Every trap, every hidden path, every carefully positioned object had been accounted for. Benjamin understood the magnitude of what he was witnessing. The workshop was not only a storage space but a psychological playground, designed to test anyone who sought to reclaim the stolen masterpiece. As the first rays of dawn crept through the warehouse windows, Benjamin mapped the final variables in his mind. He knew the thief's next moves, potential collaborators, and the weaknesses inherent in this meticulously constructed lair. Soon, he would confront the mastermind directly, but for now, observation and strategy were paramount. Benjamin Hard stepped back, eyes lingering on the screen. Every detail, every nuance, every subtle marker had been recorded in his mind. This was more than a discovery, it was an insight into the mind of a criminal who saw the world as a complex puzzle. And for Benjamin, the real game, the recovery of the painting and the ultimate resolution of the theft, was about to begin. Benjamin Hard left the warehouse as dawn broke, the city still wrapped in a quiet haze. The workshop had offered more than clues, it had revealed the meticulous nature of the thief and hinted at a greater mind orchestrating the operation. He knew the final confrontation was near. The mastermind behind the theft of the scream was no ordinary criminal, they were calculating, intelligent, and utterly confident in their control over the game. Using the notebook and the patterns he had observed, Benjamin reconstructed the thief's connections and movements. Each route, each trap, each psychological cue pointed to one individual, someone with access to elite art circles, knowledge of security systems, and a taste for challenges. The identity was subtle, hidden in plain sight among the network of the underground art club, but Benjamin's analysis left no doubt. He returned to the auction house under the cover of morning, moving silently through the now familiar halls. The staff carried on with cautious efficiency, unaware that Benjamin had already solved most of the puzzle. Every step he took was deliberate, allowing him to gauge reactions, observe micro-expressions, and confirm the patterns he had predicted. Then came the moment of realization. In the office of Victor Kane, the owner of the auction house, Benjamin found evidence that tied the mastermind directly to the theft. A series of correspondences, coded schedules, and unusual access requests pointed to Kane's deeper involvement than he had admitted. The man's charisma, careful control, and guarded demeanor were more than personality traits, they were deliberate shields, hiding a calculating intelligence that had orchestrated the disappearance of the painting. Benjamin confronted Kane in his office, the city's skyline glowing behind the large windows. Kane's composure remained intact, yet his eyes betrayed the slightest flicker of recognition. "Mr. Hard," Kane said smoothly, "I hope your visit is not intrusive." Benjamin's voice was calm, precise. "Intrusive? Not at all. But the evidence is clear," Victor. The theft, the underground networks, the misdirection, it all points to someone with your knowledge, access, and control. You designed it meticulously, yet you left traces only a trained observer could detect. Kane's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Clever. I underestimated your persistence. But tell me, Benjamin, what will you do with knowledge like this? Expose it? Protect it? Or simply, enjoy the game? Benjamin studied him, noting every micro-expression, every calculated pause. The game has consequences, he replied. And no control, no matter how complete, is perfect. Every move you made has a flaw. And flaws are what I follow. The confrontation was quiet but intense. Kane's confidence remained, yet beneath it, the cracks of deception were evident. Benjamin did not need a confession, the patterns, the evidence, and the subtle markers in Kane's behavior were enough. The mastermind had been revealed, their intellect and audacity undeniable, but so had the inevitability of Benjamin Hard's observation. With the confrontation complete, Benjamin documented every detail in his mind and notes. He knew the paths, the psychological intricacies, and the manipulations that had guided the theft. The mastermind's brilliance had been formidable, but Benjamin's patience, analysis, and insight had surpassed it. As he left the auction house, Benjamin allowed himself a quiet satisfaction. The city stretched before him, unaware of the subtle chess game that had played out behind its walls. The mastermind had been revealed, the evidence meticulously catalogued, and the path to recovering the scream was now clear. For Benjamin Hard, this was not the end, but the final step before reclaiming the masterpiece, a challenge met with intellect, observation, and the precision that had defined his career. The night was still, almost reverent, as Benjamin Hard approached the final location where the scream had been hidden. Months of observation, deduction, and careful mapping had led him to this abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Manhattan. The streets were quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic and the occasional dripping of rainwater from the rooftops. Benjamin's pulse was steady, but his senses were fully alert. This was the moment all his meticulous work had been building toward. He slipped inside, moving silently through the shadows. Every corner, every doorway, every faint reflection was scrutinized. The warehouse was arranged with precision, empty crates and stacks of canvases created both obstacles and hiding spots. Benjamin had anticipated the layout, having reconstructed it in his mind countless times. Still, caution was paramount. One misstep could ruin months of careful observation. And then he saw it. The scream. The painting was perched on a reinforced easel, illuminated by a single focused lamp. Its iconic figure, hands pressed to its face in eternal anguish, seemed almost to breathe under the dim light. Benjamin's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the satisfaction of recognition. Every calculation, every clue, every shadow had led him to this moment. He approached cautiously, noting the security measures around the painting. A network of tripwires, motion sensors, and pressure-sensitive panels could have triggered alarms. Benjamin bypassed them with the precision only years of observation and experience could afford. Each step, each hand movement, was deliberate, ensuring that he left no trace behind. He studied the painting itself, confirming its authenticity, noting minor details, the subtle craquelure in the paint, the slight unevenness of the canvas, that only a trained eye would notice. Then he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Years of meticulous work, hundreds of calculations, dozens of human observations, and countless hours of mental reconstruction had culminated in this moment. The scream was safe, recovered, and no longer lost to the shadows. As he secured the painting for transport, Benjamin noticed a small object nearby, a tiny, antique key, almost hidden beneath the easel. He picked it up carefully, recognizing its significance. The key was a personal mark left by the thief, a signature, a token of the intricate game they had played. Benjamin added it to his collection of trophies, each representing a case solved, a mystery unraveled, a challenge met and mastered. Exiting the warehouse, Benjamin felt the weight of satisfaction. Manhattan's skyline stretched before him, glittering under the early dawn. The city, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded, continued its restless rhythm. Yet Benjamin carried with him the quiet triumph of intellect, patience, and observation. He had tracked shadows, deciphered human behavior, and recovered a masterpiece that many had deemed irretrievable. Back in his loft, Benjamin placed the key on a shelf alongside other trophies, each item a silent testament to his work. The screen would be returned to the auction house under secure protection, its story enriched by the peril and ingenuity that had defined its disappearance and recovery. Sitting at his desk, Benjamin poured a cup of green tea and allowed himself a moment of reflection. The city outside was alive, vibrant, and unaware, but he had navigated its hidden currents, outwitted the mastermind, and solved a crime that challenged both intellect and instinct. Every piece of evidence, every pattern, every human quirk had played a role in the resolution. And as Benjamin Hard gazed at the small key in his hand, now safely among his other trophies, he understood something profound. In every case, in every shadow, and in every challenge, there was a pattern waiting to be seen. The thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of discovery, and the quiet victory of intellect were rewards no city light or applause could match. With the screen recovered and the key added to his collection, Benjamin Hard felt the familiar, satisfying rhythm of a puzzle solved. The city slept unaware, but he had once again walked through shadows, decoded human motives, and emerged with both the truth and a trophy. And in the quiet of his loft, the world of art, crime, and human cunning felt, at least for a moment, entirely under his watchful eye.